Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar, where we are going to be introducing a new method assessing the social impact done by CIRAD and Vitropic. Thank you very much for replying to this webinar. You are more than 150 participants with the University of, with many stakeholders, from research and development, certificate companies, export sector industries, and authorities, national authorities. So we see that there is a strong need for this webinar. This webinar will last 2 hours, and we will have a good part of this webinar dedicated to question and answer session, to debate session, and we hope it'll last at least 1 hour. For this session, question answers / debate, we will organize it in 2 branches. First, we will be having questions to clarify a part of our presentation. We will have our 2 colleagues, Carolina, that most of you know, and another colleague, Romy Shaib, that does analysis of the life cycle of social impact. And actually, she is looking for a job. So if that interests someone, she is looking for a position. But they will be moderating this debate. So we will have this part where we will have the questions for clarifying the presentation, and then we'll have another part of the session that will be a debate in French, English, and Spanish. And we will be typing the questions not in the chat in the chat, but you have a Q&A box in the middle of your screen. So please, you can write your questions there. This webinar will be recorded, and we will be also diffusing this webinar on freedcom.com. The presentation, our PowerPoint presentation, has been sent by a QR code. You will have it in French and English, and you'll be able to follow the debate maybe easier from your home. That's the organization question. That's the housekeeping part. And now we're going to start our presentation. Well, we're going to speak about the agenda first. We have 3 colleagues that will be speaking today. Myself, I am a agroeconomist. I do market analysis, and I am a coordinator at CIRAD. CIRAD is a research institute for tropical products in France. I also leave the floor to Anaïs Falk, and she will be speaking about the case study on a banana plantation. We'll have Catherine Macombe. She'll be taking the floor to speak about the neighbor method. And she'll be speaking about how to apply this method, and we hope this method will be used largely by all of you. And I'll have the honor of closing this program with Catherine Macomb. I want to introduce this topic, and we will all be speaking the same language. I will be speaking about the issues we have concerning the assessment, especially at the social level. And I will be very brief. As you all know, there are many changements, regulations that make the farmer market a lot of evolution. They have to change, they have to transform, and they have to start their social transition or environmental transition. I won't be speaking about all the items or the elements that are shown here in this slide, but I will say that the drive of this changement can go to the left. So we have the regulation. Regulation are very strong, are very demanding, like we have in Europe, for example, the Green Deal, different these different provisions and regulations in general. And then we have the basic part, which are, for example, the regulation concerning the product itself. For example, the banana farmers, they have to follow a regulation.
De bananes en Europe. La soft law, ça c'est toute la partie certification, label, collectif, qui pèse de plus en plus fort et qui oriente de plus en plus
collective label that is impacting even more the industry. We also have the climate change that is also impacting, for example, with different diseases, and it's impacting the banana industry. The awareness of these issues, we have a growing demand of having organic products and sustainable products, especially. And then a marketing that is trying to give a lot of value to the transition efforts that all the companies are taking or carrying. If we want to respond to these issues, we are offering this classic method. We have 3 pages. First, the assessment done by all the stakeholders. This is like the main part. This is critical part. So we can start our assessment. And we have the definition of different methods and techniques. And having these actors to help with this transition and will be able to help with these changements. I'll now give the floor to Anaïs Falk. She'll be presenting the neighbor method. This method is trying to help within this process of assessment. And it's going to do the assessment, the evaluation of all the changes in the field. Anaïs, the floor is yours. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Anaïs Falk. I work at Vitropic and Cirad. I will be speaking about the case study that we done with the neighbor method on the banana fields. I will be speaking theoretically because the results are confidential so far. And then I'll be giving the floor to Catherine, and she'll be presenting to you this method in detail. Here, I'm showing you the histogram And an example of a result we can have using this method, the neighbor method, in a banana plantation field. There are two big principles that this method has. The first one being, as you can see in this method, we're going to define the standard of life in comparing it with different services. So how's the standard of living? Is this standard being correct or not? So these for us are the basic services. For example, for us, it could be healthcare, it could be access to education, access to transportation, etc. What we want to assess here for the workers and their families is the quality of accessibility to different services, services that are important to these families. First, it'll be important to know what are the services that are important to families. For example, in this case, will be access to healthcare. And we will have a histogram like this one. The second principle that's important in our method is that the families will judge the quality of access to those services, comparing themselves to their neighbors. So comparing themselves to the social norm, this social norm that is judged as normal, deemed as normal in the neighborhood. So that's why the method is called the neighbor method. So we have this social norm, and the family will judge the level of access, taking into account that the social norm is considered normal in each area. So for each family, we will be interviewing them. We're going to compare the access they have to the services, comparing to the social norm. Here, for example, for healthcare, the social norm would be to have access to to healthcare, having access to a physician and to medication. And as you can see, we have three groups. We have group 1 with A in green, B in yellow, and C in orange. So we have these three levels. For each level, we will be able to see for each family, the level of access that they reach, comparing it to the total level of access. So comparing it to the social norm. For each level, if the family, for example, has access to a physician, then she'll have 1 point. If she doesn't have access to a physician, then she'll have 0 points. And the social norm equals 3 points, as you can see here. So if we take family 4, for example, she has an access level of 1.5 out of 3. These will help us check the gaps, what we call the gaps, which means the access between the real access to the family that the family has and the access that this family judges as normal in the zone, so the social norm. So those 3 points. We are able to compare the access within different areas. And as you can see here, for family number 4, they are missing the access to a hospital, and they have a problem with the access to medication. This gap will allow us to see where the social progress could be possible. This is a first example, and it's a real perspective of what you can hope for this method. We've done this study, and we did these for different families. We did this type of histograms for different services that we have. Here, as you can see in this case study, we had different groups. I have 1, 2, and 3. Group 1 would be families that live close to the plantation. in the area of influence, and they will be considered employees or workers. Here, group 2, we will have 12 families as well as we had within group number 1. And we'll have families that are not far from the plantation without the workers working in the plantation. And then the group number 3, it'll be a group of reference. This means that it's a group that lives far away from a plantation. We will be able to see the gap that exists between the groups and also see the difference or the influence that a plantation will have in the standards of living of the families. What we can only see with what we can only also do with this neighbor method is to compare zones. So for example, group 1 and group 3, group 1 and group 2 live in the same area as the plantation. Group 3 is completely different, far away from it. We are able to compare these between the two areas, between the two sites, and we can see that the normal social norms are also different for the same services. For example, for the site number 1, the social norm is to having access to a...
Sur le site 2, c'était avoir accès à un dispensaire local et à un hôpital public. Et même si la norme est différente, on peut quand même comparer les deux zones, puisque ce qu'on compare, en fait, c'est le gap, c'est la zone HCM.
Two zones anyway, because we are trying to see what's the gap that we have between the two of them. So we can compare the two sites. So this is the type of results we can have. Those are the outcomes. And now I will try to explain how we did for this case study.
Comme je vous l'ai expliqué, on s'intéresse donc aux services qui sont
So how to do that on the field? As I said, we really focused on the services that are important for the families. We are doing this with different questionnaires of different stakeholders, meaning those are people who can actually talk about standard of living, the people who are in which we are interested. It could be representative of the government. It could be physicians in this area. It could be managers at the plantation. All these people are going to help us to determine the services that are important for those families. The other people who are going to help us, it is the plantation itself and the service RSE. And this plantation has a goal to fill the gaps, to have a social progress as well. So this is important that the plantation and the RSE services could be really together in there. And we're going to ask those stakeholders and the families. And finally, we can check and identify the important services for those families as we ask them directly. Once we have a list of the important services, we select small numbers because you have a lot of different answers. For this study case, when we selected 3 important services, and then we're going to interview the families directly. So you saw earlier on the histogram that we were 12 families in the group. For each group, you can tell yourself that it's not a whole lot, but we do not work in using statistics. We do work in using really selected sample, meaning we're going to select specifically some families, the ones that are the most different. So when it comes to age, what kind of family is it, what kind of work, etc., and to have a panel of different people that are very, very different, and they have a same social norm, which allow us to validate with a lot of strength those results, those outcomes. So once we have selected those families that we want to ask, where we want to ask them questions, we ask them what is the level of the social standard for each service. In this case, it would be what they believe is the correct level in this area when compared to the neighbors. And then we're going to ask them if they have access those specific families. And then we need to separate this, we need to understand the breakdown of the standards and the breakdown of the service. And then finally, we will analyze each interview, and we can create a histogram, which I showed you earlier, showing the level of the social norm, how it is spread, the level reached by the family, and the breakdown of the service. And the outcome is to talk with the plantation, to give them the outcomes, and see how the plantation is positioned compared to other areas. So this is what we can get with this neighbor method, and how things happen on the field. We then are going to move on to my coworker, and she's going to tell you what is the methodology. And I just wanted to see if there were any questions before we move on. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine regarding the methodology of how we did this. Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Catherine Macombe. I am a researcher at the National Institute of Environmental Agriculture at the INRAE, which is a French institute, and I work in a research group which is called ELSA. We analyze the cycle of social life of type 2, which means the social CV, and I have the privilege to be in charge of the thesis of Anaïs, and I'm going to continue her presentation by going back to the objectives and principle of these objectives. So she showed you the outcomes which were put together in 2022. So the objectives that we were trying to get with the create this neighbor method was to assess the standard of living of farm worker or farmer families. And this methodology could be applicable to workers in globalized industries in the South, even when there is no market for certain services, in some circumstances for some services, or when the quality of those services is not good. So we needed to have a methodology which would give us some of the outcomes of those situations, even in extreme situation, in order to make that assessment. So the principles for this methodology were the one that Anaïs has presented earlier. We start from the idea that the standard of living is good if you have access to basic services. The basic services would be, for example, healthcare access, education access, housing access, etc., etc. And in all of cases, those interested parties would identify the basic services on which we need to research, which are important to them, those basic services. The second principle is that we're going to compare the size of the gaps between the level of access to basic services and the social norm. So this assessment will be done when you compare it with the social the basic services that have been identified by other groups. So the important question is to ask is to how to evaluate the gaps. So the gap here is it's between the levels of the social norm and some services and the social norm for this service in particular. So we can make an assessment of the gap for one family, which should be the gap right there that we just talked about, but we can also determine the gap with a surface on the graph, meaning that surface which is the gap between all of the families and the social norm level which they have access to or they don't. So this gap here is for families for a specific service, and we can make an assessment by comparing the levels of the average access achieved with what is considered the family and the normal by the group. So it is very contextual, because the level of the social norm is quite different. It can be very different from one area to another, and it's only regarding the services that we are working on at this particular moment. So we have a lot of differences, nuance right there on those social norms. So the goal here, of course, since we are very close to the social reality, we need to get outcomes as we offer contracts of progresses for some services, at least at the very least, in order to have progress in a concrete way, so we can have real impact, social impact, and the well-being, the social well-being of those families that we're talking about. So the originality of this method, we will come back to it later on, is that we can have a reference the level of the local social norm, which allows us to compare between countries, between sites, between methods of plantation, the way the work is doing. And we can do that and we can compare those gaps, even though the social norm to a specific country does not have the same nature than the social nature of the country B, of the B country. Here's an example. So you have, for example, social standard country A, which has a free access to secondary education. So the social norm in the country B has a free access to the elementary school. You can see that the two social norms are different, but we can bring back those two social norms right here with the data that we have on the same line here, because in the two cases, it's the level that is acceptable as a consensus from the population, from the A country and from the B country. So it's logical to compare the gap A to gap B, even though the point of the reference is not the same. It's not the same consistency with the social norm from one country to the other country. So this is, again, the histogram it's a theoretical example of access to care for three different countries. You have country 1, country 2, country 3. You have here in green here the gap country 1. For the country 2, you have a light green, and in yellow, you have a gap of the country 3, but you have to understand that those are the surfaces of the gaps that we can compare. And as Anaïs explained earlier, that we are studying, because the gaps are showing the actual nature, the precise nature of what is lacking, what is the problem for each of the services. So difficulty with the interviews is to try to sort out the services in order to extract the social norm. Of course it is. People are not going to tell us what is the norm, the social norm. We need to go search within those interviews in order to find out. Within those interviews, you have some people who say they have easy access to a physician, and some others say we do not have easy access to a physician. So this is why we have the two possibilities here. Within the interviews, some people say that the access to medication is easy. Some say, no, we cannot have access to medication, which have been prescribed. And then we have other people, or some of the people, of the same people, who said we don't have access to a hospital, while other people say we do have access to a hospital. And then when we combine all of those different parts that we feel are normal within this social context, from those people who interview, we get to the social local norm? Is it access to a doctor for diagnostic and primary care, access to medication, and access to a hospital? Those here, you have the three components that are making it what is the social norm. Of course, the families who do not have access to a physician, to medication, and to a hospital are going to find themselves elsewhere on this diagram and will not fill out those three categories in order to have that line that we saw earlier in the middle, which represent the social norm. So do we have any questions so far, please? Questions, so people maybe try to understand the methodology. There is a question within the Q&R section, the chat. People is asking us, how can we complement the language in the calculating the language with the living way? We are going to talk about it with one of the slides, which we will have shortly. But maybe we just want to remind people that there is a Q&R area where you can ask all of the questions that you want in English, in French, or in Spanish. We have another question which just showed up now, and the question is telling us that the methodology is quite interesting, but also very local. How is this normal when you are an outside observer? Because you have hours and hours of interviews on each site. So what kind of organism, what kind of organization can have this kind of data and that database? We will answer this question within the second part of the presentation, because this is quite a large, wide area that we need to focus on. And we're going to talk about it, okay? No problem. And another one, it's how do we select the families when we do those interviews? So did you want to answer that? So what we have decided to do, since we had people who were talking to of the RSC service of the plantation, which were very willing to help us, we composed a list of characteristics so they would select a more diversified type of families. We said, for example, we want single people, we want married people, we want people with children, people without children, we want people who have maybe somebody has a handicap in the family, and some people who don't. We want people who are blue workers, blue collar workers, and maybe some others who have positions that are a little higher on the scale. So however, we did ask them for group one, just families with workers in the plantation, where at least one person in the family works in the plantation. And in the number two group, which were the people that were the neighbors, we asked them that no one in the family would work in the plantation. So they were selected because we had the RSC services, which are very familiar with what's going on the field, which we were not aware of. And they went through the chief of the village. We needed to ask the chief of each village to have access to the different sites and those different families. So we can also add that Anaïs interview people by herself at their houses without any interpreter, without somebody from the plantation. Everybody spoke French in this particular case. She was alone with them, and the interviews would take about 60 to 90 minutes. To continue with this, the selection of those families allowed us to have less interviews. If we had a statistical method, if we used the statistical method, we would have to have a lot of interviews. But here, this was a methodology which we use quite often in the qualitative methods. So select most diverse families with a lot of variety. Another question, could it be a social norm to not have access to a physician or hospital or medication? Could that be considered a social norm? We will answer to this question on the second part of the presentation, which is absolutely relevant to what we're saying. Yes, sometimes things are very amazing for us in the Western world when you see the reaction of some families. And there is also another question regarding the understanding. How can we define the norm? Is the norm based on the regulation or subjectivity? What is it? On the experience? No, this is really based on subjectivity here. It is very subjective. It is done through the analysis of the interviews. Yes, this is those are some of the points which you are going to see, which is the originality of the method. We are putting back in the center the representation of the workers' family, the people who are representing this population, where we want to make an assessment of the social norm. We are trying to put back, we're trying to understand what is the social norm in their country, in their area, and not compared to a Western kind of social norm. We have other questions that are coming in. How does this methodology gives values to define level and social norms? I'm not sure. Maybe we can answer this question. That's the first part of the question. Let's just answer the first part of the question. How do we attribute the values? So here, what we did something very simple, meaning that for each of the services, we spread out the services at different level, because this was the way it was happening when we talk to the family, when we ask the families. For example, for housing, there were 5 different levels when it comes to housing. For the access to healthcare, there were 3 levels. So the number of levels is not pre-defined in advance. So the points that we give for the social norm, when we give you 3 points, it could have been out of 5, out of 10 points. It really depends on the social norm that we are studying. So this is not an issue after that when we want to compare different situations, because even on the same service, it is very possible that in one country we have social norm out of 3 points, in some other country is 5 points, but it doesn't matter because we're going to completely flat out the whole system. Then we decided to work with points instead of a percentage. It was not an issue for us.
Composant le service global santé, par exemple.
So the families that will be, for example, speak about access to healthcare, they will let us know in how many levels we need to separate the social norm, but we won't be able to know beforehand. We cannot choose it beforehand. Okay, the second part of the question was, is the average of family can be used as an average for the whole country? Or no? So we're not working at a country level again. Sorry, it depends on the context. We are working at a very small zone. We're not working at a country level. We're working at a local level, at an area level, at a social group level. So we cannot use the outcomes at a country level. Another question. Is it possible to combine the subjective normal social norms to the country regulation? We can compare them. There's no problem comparing them. However, when we are speaking to the families, they understand very well when Anais asks, what do you do when your kid is sick? And they will explain it very well. But it is very rare that a regulation, national regulation, will speak about access to a specific service. It'll speak, for example, the regulations will speak about number of physician density or the installation of a center, a hospital center, but it's not very practical to speak at a global service at the national level and then speak to these families to that level. There was also another study, an academic study. So we have literature that speaks about national norms in the country, access to education, literacy, and all different data that we can use. So that's what you could know before to know how it functions. Another question. Could we use this methodology to evaluate standards of life of small workers, or only for workers that are employed at the plantation? We can use it, yes, we can use it. Okay, thank you very much, Carolina. We would also like to show you the position of the neighbor method, sorry, within the family. So as you can see here, Anais has done the database within Google, Silk Icon, and Scorpius. So she selected 427 documents, so from different literature published. She has classified these different 427 documents in different method families. It's like animals. We have different races or different animal types. It's the same for methods. So we have the absolute method. And here, what we chose to represent the standard of life does not take into account the standard of life in the society or in a specific context. As you can see here in the blue box, we're not taking into account what's happening in the standard of life of the society. In the green cases, as you can see, the relative methods, we have here a proxy chosen to represent the standard of living that takes into account in the normal standard of living of the surrounding society. That's why we're calling them relative methods, because they are called relative because they are always relative to what's happening around the point we're trying to analyze or assess. Here you can see different methods, major methods, and you can see here the reference. It's Morris 2003. And this is a method where we have different budget based on food and energy, or it could be on budget, as you can see in dark blue. It'll be a basket, a food basket, and we will see if the person who we are analyzing the standard of living is capable with his resources of obtaining this basket of goods. As you can see here, the authors are Morris, other authors, and also the work of Mr. Anker. In the budget method, we have the method based on food and energy instead of a monetary budget. And then we have the ratio method. We also have the absolute deprivation score methods. and also the physiological deprivation score method. Then we are going to assess the individuals that are undernourished. There is a publication that is giving a lot of details about this method, and we will be speaking about it later on. So this is what we can say about absolute methods. Concerning relative methods in these evaluation methods of poverty, we are taking into account what's happening in the surroundings of the individual or the family. And we are evaluating here poverty. Here we have another author, Roundtree, another English author, and we are going to do the analysis of the relative budget methods. But we also have the relative budget methods based on food, as we did with the absolute method. We also have the different proportion methods. And we also have the relative deprivation score methods with 1979. He did something that was very inspiring for the neighbor method. And we have Professor Middleton, English author again, the year 2000. And he has developed a method in which there are these people are the people that are involved. We can see the poor who define where to go and buy.
La méthode Neighbour, elle s'inspire
We
à la
want
fois
to
des Relative Deprivation Score Method, en particulier du travail de Townsend en 79, et des méthodes consensuelles.
describe that the method is inspired by both the relative deprivation scores in particular and also the work of Dobnov
pour l'accès aux services et l'accès aux biens.
That speaks about the existence of this social norm, local social norm, the access of services and access of goods. So here they are saying that the deprivation depends on a social norm. It says that the people are the ones that are setting the social norm. We can say that deprivation depends on a norm, a local social norm, and they can be deprived of property or social or services. And it says that when we don't have access to something, we can do something else. For example, here, he's saying that we can evaluate or assess differently the standard of living. The basic social services are considered important. These important basic services are chosen according to the population surveyed and the possibility of progress of the company. Anaïs has detected, thanks to the interrogation of 5 stakeholders, services that were important for the population, but there were 2 services where the company said that they couldn't do anything because they didn't have enough resources. So the company selected 3 services where they were able to progress. And the neighbor method allows the comparate to do this comparison between different sites. The characteristics of the neighbor method is that the method approaches the standard of living directly or indirectly, that the method is suitable for situations where there are no defined prices for certain basic services, so they can function without assuming the existence of a market. Neighbor method takes into account the representation of the people concerned and what it is important for their standard of living, without projecting onto the field the bias of other societies, for example, even if there are biases that are positive. So it represents the people that are concerned. This method takes into account the environmental services that already exist, because the representation of people depends on what they can see on TV, of course. They're also, they know the reality. So if, for example, we create a hospital, we'll create the fact of going to this hospital. So, for example, in places where there's no hospital around, people are not asking for hospital because they know the reality where they live. We also have this method. It allows comprehensive comparisons between countries and sectors, and we can do these comparisons including social economic context, even if they're different. So if we want to compare the living wage method and the neighbor method, the objectives are different. So for the living wage method, it allows through the assessment of salaries and wages, we can have the goal of increasing wages or salaries individually. The neighbor method, their main goal is to increase the level of service. So we're speaking at a collective level. In the living wage method, as we already said a couple of minutes ago, we are going to determine baskets of monetarized goods and services to know or to assess the living wage in a given country and at the country level. Whereas with the method, the neighbor method, we are determining the gaps in access to services compared to the local norm for different services. And the main goal is to improve the access to these services. The living wage method is numerical, easier to use as an indicator. We have the numbers as KPIs. And the different interests that we have at the neighbor method is to work in the absence of markets. That's something mandatory. Give the floor to the people concerned. We also need to prioritize the needs and enables service-to-service comparisons between different fields. So it allows us to have comparison of the same services between different fields. So these two methods are complementary because their objectives, their main goals, and their interests are very different. So they are complementary. Are there any other questions before speaking about different possible applications? Yes, there is a question. Could you please let us know how different actors in a specific field could use these methods to improve the social level of their workers? For example, the farmer.
Je pense qu'on va d'ailleurs y répondre dans les différentes
We will be
applications,
speaking
d'un
with.
point de vue. Ouais,
Okay,
va évoquer un petit peu.
we're going to speak about that.
Je propose qu'on le prête après. C'est une
It's
vraie
a
grande
very
question qui
important. It's a very important and deep question. There's another question concerning the case study that Anaïs presented. What was the reaction of the company when they saw the outcomes? Yes, I'll answer. It was very interesting because first it helped with the social dialogue, internal social dialogue. The managers of the plantation,
comment dire, c'est pas qu'ils ont appris des choses, mais ils ont appréhendé, voilà, ils ont appréhendé la situation différemment. Ça leur a
took
permis
over the situation
de, en
differently.
fait, mieux
They were
cibler,
able to
enfin, en fait, ils réfléchissent pour mieux
target better
cibler
their
leurs
actions.
actions RSE par rapport aux résultats qu'on leur a proposés. Ça a fait émerger
And
en fait
thanks
beaucoup
to the
d'idées
outcomes that
d'actions
they
pour combler ces gaps.
were
Ils ont
seeing.
été très,
So they were able
très
to
actifs et enfin, très
fill the
tournés sur
gaps.
la
They were
proposition
very
de plan d'action.
active and proactive with the
Ils
propositions,
ont objectivé
and
aussi grâce à ton
they were
travail,
able to follow all the
ils ont
recommendations too.
des idées un peu
They
floues
were able to
qu'ils avaient
target
sur les impacts
ideas that they
de leurs
had
propres effets
about the
parce qu'ils
impacts of
ils travaillent
their
depuis de très
of
nombreuses années et
their
leurs
actions.
initiatives sociales, elles partaient un peu dans toutes les directions.
They have
Là,
been
ils
working
ont
for a
pu
couple of
regarder
years, and all
et
the
se
social
concentrer
initiatives
sur
were
ce qui est
going a little bit everywhere in different directions. So it was able to give them a frame.
Vous avez bien
They were able to
saisi maintenant,
work better.
on en parle depuis 1 heure.
Yes.
Une méthode
So
qui est
we've been speaking for an hour. So as you understood, it's a
très
method that
localisée
is
autour d'une
very
plantation,
local to a
besoin de la
specific
plantation.
group
En tout cas, on
around
s'intéresse
the
au
plantation.
ressenti de la
We
population,
are
au vécu de la population.
interested
Et
in
l'évaluation,
knowing
elle concerne
the
les services.
services and
Et
the
donc, on y est
feelings of
déjà,
the specific
et c'est le
population.
travail qu'on
And
ne présentera
that's
pas
the
aujourd'hui,
work
mais
we
on est
are
déjà dans le pas
showing you
suivant, c'est-à-dire que
today.
le
Well, we're
pas
not
pour
showing
aller
you the whole
de
work today, but
l'évaluation
that's what we're
jusqu'à
doing.
l'action,
We're showing
eh ben,
showing
il est
you the
beaucoup plus facile à
assessment
franchir
and
puisqu'on
the
est déjà
action.
dans l'évaluation des services
We
qui
are
sont rendus ou
assessing
qui sont
the
pas rendus.
services that
Typiquement,
are available or
sur
not
la
available.
présentation de
For example, during the
cas d'étude, on peut
presentation
très bien
about
dire
the case
à
study,
partir du moment où il y a un accès déficient aux médicaments,
if we have a
déjà,
difficult
on est
access
déjà
to
dans
medication,
l'action,
then we're already in the
dans le
action.
progrès. Donc ça, je pense que
We already have a plan to
même
progress.
si c'est un peu
So
long,
even
on verra,
though
c'est
it
pas
could
si
be
long que ça
long,
à mettre,
and
à
it's not that long
développer,
actually to
ça
develop, it
facilite
helps
la mise en
to
œuvre des
execute
actions correctives
the
sociales.
actions needed at social level.
Pour compléter aussi
Yes, to
sur la
continue
réaction au
on
plus haut
the
niveau,
reaction at the high
il
level
était,
in the hierarchy,
il y avait plusieurs
we
études
must said that there were
en
several
même temps,
studies that were going on
mais
at the same
l'étude
time,
d'Anaïs
but the Anaïs study was linked to the CEO of the company directly. And when we met him to show him what the outcomes of our work, he really showed a lot of interest. There was a lot of consciousness of the methodology that we used because the company asked us to continue the study on other plantations. And Anaïs is going to go in June to continue the work on another plantation.
Alors, on va continuer.
We're going to continue our own nation in order to talk about the various possible applications. So this applies to small farmers. I wanted to show you an arrow for each small farmers, and specifically if they are organized in a co-op, a production co-op, a SICA, but also if we have an NGO which wants to work with them. The condition in this particular case, in order to have progress contracts for us, would be to identifying social norms, meaning that we will not have the same homogeneity, social homogeneity within the farmers within a co-op than we have with the workers in the plantation, in a specific plantation. But it is doable. We just need to have a partner, SICA, co-op, or NGO, which decided to put in place progress contracts in order to better the lives of those small farmers. So there is absolutely no reason for this norm not to work in that specific case, that neighbor would not work in that specific case. We just need to make sure that we can identify the different social groups, the different social norms which are in relation to those social groups. So can a neighbor apply to other sectors than agriculture in developing countries? Why not? People work in the clothing industry, in the metal industry, etc. But we need to have the company to be willing, the company that employs those workers, they must be willing to really have social progress. And it's very important when we ask the stakeholder directly, or some families, in case the stakeholders are too difficult to get in touch with. And we can definitely have those interviews with the selected sample of families to identify the social norms and the gaps. So it is not applicable just to the agriculture. No, it could be used elsewhere in other industries. The question can be asked about using neighbors in emerging countries. We could think at first that it wouldn't be useful, but neighbor is interested to access to services in order to give access to the services and to really put back in place those services that are available compared to the social norm, the local social norm. In some cases, you have beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries of welfare do not really have access to the services, and neighbor could explore this situation and to be the first step to mediation. So to conclude, Neighbour is a method of assessing the standard of living of working class families that was completed quickly because it was less than 6 months. We want to have the second study in less time. So 6 months was the total time it took, including the interviews, the outcome, etc., which is applicable to workers in the globalized industries in 2022, which allowed to compare between 3 sites, which will really lead to progress contract on certain services, depending on the goodwill and the means of the company on which this study has been done, and to ease the social dialogue. So the limits of this methodology, it is absolutely essential to have the participation of the employer or the producer group, an organization that is here, of small farmers or workers. We also have to find families to interview, which takes time, and privilege access to the
RSE de la plantation qui nous a
the
procuré
plantation,
cet accès
which gave us access, privileged access. And to me, this was really, if we don't have privileged access to the field, we cannot do this study because we cannot find and select the sample of families that we need to. Conducting interviews requires expertise, This is something that you can learn quite quickly. You have to play, you have to do role playing, etc. together. And then finally, to compare two sites or two countries, you need to process the same services on both sites or both countries. And people that you ask a question, they might not be give you the answers that you want to hear, and they might not select the services, the same type of services from one country to another, from one site to another site. So Neighbour can evaluate the level of the social level of the small farmers. You can compare between different sites, and the goal is to get to the progress contract, which could be taken on by the co-op or the company or an ONG, or between providers or people who are deciders. So Neighbours has been published and is accessible to all. The CSR departments can use it to conduct assessment of access to important services for the populations they want to improve. So this is methodology which is compatible with the due diligence certification between providers and deciders. Do not hesitate to use it.
Merci Catherine.
Thank you very much, Catherine and Anaïs, and our two co-workers here. Do we have any questions? Maybe we can go back to the questions that were asked earlier. So we will talk about, we said it several times, the question of the progress contracts. This is an important subject because it is a topic that actually had us started. And to tell us first to have a methodology which should be quick, which would be not too expensive, and onto which we could come back and with the different modifications and of the social behaviors, of social investment. So a modification of the social environment of these groups, groups that are fragile, that we were trying to assess. And the idea was that if the methodology, as we put it together in a usual way, could be developed on the field between 4 and 6 months, it is a lot simpler to come back 2 years later if we suppose that an investment or a change has happened within the past 2 years and brought some good results on the field, so has changed the life of people on the field. This is the idea. We're trying to be as close to the field as possible in order to, for the people's life to change for the better, the people who live in this region, in this social universe in which they live, and not to change the social level of a whole country. That is not our ambition. Well, not yet, but to get as close as possible to the field on site and to be there and to be involved with the reinvestment to come back several years later, because once again, we made an assessment on the services, and therefore, I'm going to say it again, from service to action, there's only one. So this is why that is interesting. That this method is very interesting between the deciders, people who the decision makers, and the providers, because and the distributors, because everybody has their roadmap. Everybody agrees on the progress contract, and we can make an assessment of the changes that happen, which is quite simple to do. This is why we talk about progress contracts, because we have a methodology which we can use, of course. When we can come back to the questions which we have not answered, is that how can the actors, how can we have actors react to this social progress, and how can you normalize a methodology that is so localized, that is so on the field in a particular area? Well, what we can imagine is that for a subdivision, it could work better by subdivision. Because for a subdivision of a particular company, we could have several studies, which we take, for example, the banana industry, plantation. We would have several plantations which belongs to different companies or different co-op of producers, which are farmers, which would show the different type of assessments and could come out as a reference point to this particular to this for the banana industry or the cocoa industry, or and this, besides that, I do not think we can actually make a conclusion from one study case. We need to have different study case on a particular sector throughout different countries. And once again, for us, it's not really the question. The question of normalization, meaning that we go from a social life, local social life, to a normalization, which includes a vision that is more regional vision, a more national vision that comes out completely of the methodology, of the scope of the methodology that we try to put into place and to implement. Because we showed it to you, the social norms in one region that would be a tight region within 10 kilometers, for example, could be very different. To normalize, meaning to make a general, to make it general, to make it more wide. It's not the goal of this method. But I wanted to come back on a previous point when it comes to progress contracts. This is really, this methodology is to go beyond the scientific step. It allows to put into place measures to recenter everything. So what is also interesting, and what we didn't present today, but we kept a little slide for you in addition. We wanted to show that to you, and Catherine or Anaïs can talk about it, because we have the capacity with this methodology. We're not going to talk too much about it today, but we have this capacity to know who can make progress within the social norm. And I'm going to let you talk about it. So here I give you another type of slide here, where you can try to make a calculation for each type of services and what are the contribution of the different actors within that study, that territory that has been studied, when you have access to the services. For example, you can ask the plantation, is the plantation contributes to what percentage does the plantation contribute to the services? Are there other actors, the family, the state, the company? And we could do that for each services, and the plantation can see where they are on the scale, where they can make progress. Is it are they interested to contribute a little more for those access to services? But we're not going to present this, but it's also something that you can add to this. Another question that we have an answer to. I don't remember exactly how the question was asked, but somebody was asking which institution, which organization could contribute to a long study, which would need a lot of maintenance. Maybe I can start answering this question. I think it is not such a long study. we did it in less than 6 months. But yes, because it was the first time this study was made, I think we can do it in less times, and we have the opportunity to test within the time. It doesn't need to have a whole lot of interviews. I was by myself, and I talked to about 50 different families. I could have talked to less people, but I choose to have a lot of interviews because it was a test period. But we can do 12 to 15 interviews, family interviews. So if you only want to get interested with the workers' family, you can talk to 12 to 15 families regarding the services that we are interested in. So, and the proof here is that the plantation can be there as the principal actor, but we need to have access. It cannot be too long when it comes to access, and we need to be able to use those interviews. We don't want a methodology that is too long, which can only interest researcher, people that are doing research. No, we want those outcomes to be used by the actors for the RSC services in the plantation and other employees of other companies, of other producers, and people that can use those data and can do something. It's also trainings that could be directly made to the stakeholders. Yes, Anaïs decided to do a training for the RSC services on the plantation that you're going to see. The goal is that it could be carried not only by the research institution, but also by the RSC services or other services within the companies, co-op or NGOs, people that have interest, people who are interested in these kind of things. Certification. Yes, maybe I wanted to come back regarding the question of the norm. Is this normal? Is the norm okay, or is the norm not okay? And we come back to the certification question of how this could be included within the certification when it comes to what we see with the living wage, for example. I'm not sure if you want to keep going with this, if you want to bounce back on this. It's not going to be something that is generic, like I explained it with Denis and Catherine. We're not going to have one indicator for one country or one plantation, but we have other stakeholders who can answer to those indicators. But it would be to do a follow-up with access to services, to see, to make a new assessment, and with this study case. And as Denis said, come back several years later and see what has improved, what has changed, and to have a point of reference here that's already there. So, of course, the point of reference will be different for each actors who want to be certified, for example. So maybe you want to keep going with answering. Yes, I would say, how can I say that? We noticed that there was an activity when it comes to certification for the past years. It's been 10 years now we are studying this sector. We went from the premises of an assessment to say those were the northern norms which would be applied to the southern countries, and this was within the scope of the research project. And sometimes we were not responding properly to this because we had those bias to begin with, and then we saw those certification, and those certification which started to get interested to put everything back into context, which would be the sector that we're talking about, and also to the region, to the condition of production, to the life, to people living condition, etc. So I think we are within the sophistication, maybe in the improvement, I'm trying to find the right word, the improvement of this vision of the people who give the certificate in order to make things very simple. to have to go from a generic vision to a vision that is adapted to the environmental context. There are also other methodology which we could make an assessment when it comes to the environment, the social environment of the country or of the region. If we stay with this general scope and including the national scope, there is a risk that we're going to miss the target. And people could say that we did things too within the context, but that's the idea, that's something that is local, that to us it is not a fault, it is something that is a strength to us, because we have a very local aspect to it, and we can tell ourselves that the actions of modification, of remediation will have an impact later on.
Il y a encore une question à laquelle on n'a pas répondu, qui est, je pense, intéressante.
There is such a question that we did not reply yet, and it's very interesting. For example, not having a physician, is it a social norm? We started answering that question, but we can maybe go further. Yes, completely. That would be a social norm. We're not there to judge on the representation that the people have on their own standard of living. They can judge themselves. Of course, it could be shocking when we first hear it. The social norm can evaluate over time. It's not something still. When we're going to improve the service level, also the norm will improve. Sometimes, for example, people will not think about maybe having a physician, but having access to medication. If we change and improve the access of services, maybe the social norm will also improve. So for us, it's not something concerning. We know that at the beginning, the social norm does not correspond to the ideal point of view. And it's not something that is set for us. The interest of this method is that its method is giving the voice back to the concerned people. Okay, that's it. Thank you. So we have a question about the complementarity of both methods. For the company that you did the case study, the progress of the study and the access to services, does it go hand in hand with the wages method? So for us, as we were saying, our main goal does not concern the wage, but the access to services. But it doesn't prevent it to have a conversation about the wages. You can have a discussion about different wages, and the dialogue can start, of course, at the same time that we're trying to improve the access to services. While I was on the field, the workers were able to express their concern about wages. I was able to listen to them. I was able to listen to their complaints, but I told them this does not fit the scope of our method. Not a problem. There's a dialogue that they can have with the manager of the plantation. It's not something that it's not compatible with the method, but the method does not target the wages. Thank you. I would like to add something. I already said it a couple of times, but the method, our method, allows assess services that don't have a market yet. So a service that does not have a market, we cannot pay it, even if we are very, very rich, unless we are extremely rich and we can pay for a whole hospital, but we cannot pay a service that does not exist. So that's why the wage for us, as Anaïs said, it would be not it would be fool not to say that it's not important. It is important. It can also participate to the contribution of improving access, but
de tel ou tel service si les surplus de salaire sont affectés à ces services-là, ce qui n'est pas déjà évident.
It's not about the salary or the wage that we are speaking. Okay, it's complementary. The wages are a mean to improve access to service. It's not the final condition to access it, but for the companies or the different social organizations that do not have the service, this is not the solution. Another question? The social norm changes throughout time following the specific situation of families and depending on the moment of the interview, when the interview is done. How do you measure the level of the gap? We have to come back and we have to reassess the outcomes that we already had. So basically, we do a first visit where we can assess the situation, but then it'll evaluate because it'll change slowly, it'll take time. So we won't have the outcomes completely different if the same year I come back and do another assessment, of course. If we compare from one year to another, the results are not going to be that different. We need a couple of years to the social norm to change. So we have to come back a couple of years later to reassess the situation. There is a question about the sources that you can share to use the method. Yes, of course. We share everything. I'm going to share it. Well, I'm going to put it now in the screen. So you have all the information on the slide in your screen. You have the email of Denis. You can you can ask him an email if you need more information. You will also have the video about this webinar that will be available on Vitropic in French and in English. And we also published 2 articles that are detailing what we're doing. Of course, you cannot use the method as is. You need a training. But you have the first link to this Vitropic article, and you have the article, and it's simplified. And you also have the article about the scientific article published. It's in open access, and you will be able to see how the method was constructed.
Je fais un complément. Si vous voulez, on
I
n'a pas
wanted to add
vocation au
that
CIRAD à développer
at
une
Cirad,
expertise, pour le coup,
we are
marchande,
not developing
en routine, si vous voulez.
service that
Donc,
we could
nous,
sell. That's
on
not
est
our
à la recherche
goal.
de partenaires qui voudraient développer ça en
So
routine.
we are
Parce que nous, ce
looking
qui nous
for
intéresse
partners that would
là-dedans,
like to develop
c'est de
this
continuer
routine.
la recherche et
What we would
d'améliorer
like is
et
continue the
de suivre
research
cette méthode, cette évolution
and
de méthode, puisque comme toute
continue this
méthode,
method,
c'est à force
because as
de
every
pratiquer
method,
qu'on va s'apercevoir de gaps, de trous, de points
we are going to
d'amélioration.
see
Donc,
through
nous, ce qui nous intéresse,
practice what
c'est
we
de
can
continuer à
improve, what are the
travailler
issues. So that's what
le
interests
sujet,
us.
mais en se
We want
nourrissant
to
de cas d'études.
continue working
Voilà.
on
Et
the
comme ça
subject
se fait dans les méthodes d'évaluation
and studying the
environnementale,
case studies. And as
nous,
we
on
do with
considère,
the assessments of
les
environmental
papas-mamans
methods,
de la méthode,
we
on
feel that we are the parents
être
of this
garant
method. So we are the
rigueur
guarant,
scientifique
the
quand
guardian of
ça
this
son,
method, and we need it to be
faut être faire.
scientifically
Encore une fois, ce qui nous intéresse, nous, c'est que vous en saissiez
important. So
qu'on
we're
puisse à un
interested
moment ou
in
un autre être partie prenante parce que ça nous
having
intéresse
you taking this
de faire
method.
progresser cette méthode-là. Et puis,
We want to see it
si un
used
jour il y a
because
des
that's how we
certificateurs,
are
etc.,
going to be able to
comme ça se
progress
fait
with this
ailleurs, encore
method.
une fois,
And if one
être là
day there
pour
is a
dire, bon, bah voilà,
certification about it,
la revue critique,
then
ce qu'on appelle
we're
en
happy to
sciences.
be there
C'est-à-dire
as
la méthode
a
a été
reviewer
révélée, la méthodologie n'a pas été
to
appliquée,
show
il y a
and say,
des
okay, so the
briefs,
method
etc.
was
Voilà.
not well executed, there was
Du
something
coup,
not done
la
correctly,
méthode,
etc.
la question peut-être plus spécifique était en termes de méthode, donc de choix des
So the
familles.
question was very specific and it said, in terms of the method, so the choice of the group of family, what is the source that you can share with us?
Comment choisir les familles, comment
So
choisir
how
les
to
questions à poser,
choose
comment
basically the
savoir
families, the
si
groups, the cohorts
pratique.
that we're using. Oh, okay, so
Ben,
that's
on
the
va
practical level.
partager
Okay, I
le,
understand now.
bah ouais,
So
ce
we're going to
document,
share
Oui.
support,
the webinar.
Bon, après, il faudrait, en fait,
And
si
then
vous avez cet intérêt-là, je pense que le plus simple, c'est de
if
nous
you are very
envoyer un
interested in
mail
these,
et
I
là,
think
on
that
fera,
the easiest would
détaillant
be
votre
to
demande par mail.
send us an
Et comme
email,
ça, nous, on peut adapter notre
ask your
réponse
question, and we can adapt our response and we can speak together and maybe we can, of course,
Deux questions par rapport
make
à
an
la
offer.
certification. Oui. Donc,
Another question about
déjà, comment est-ce que
certification.
vous intégrez cette
How
méthode dans une certification?
are you
Est-ce que
going
vous
to
êtes en lien
integrate this
avec
method
des
within a
organismes de certification?
certification? And are you in contact with
Alors, nous, on ne s'intègre
certification
pas à la
organisms?
certification, c'est la certification qui va s'intégrer à
So
nous.
we're not
C'était une blague.
integrating ourselves to the
Mais nous,
certification.
on
The
délivre
certification is integrating
une
to us.
méthode
That's
qui
a
sont
joke.
validées sur le terrain.
So
Ça,
the
c'est
methods
notre
are going to
travail
be validated
de
on
scientifique.
the
Et
field.
comme je vous l'ai
That's
dit,
our
on
work as
aimerait bien
scientific people.
qu'elle soit
And
confrontée à différents terrains,
we
différents
would
univers,
like to
différentes
use this
organisations
method in different
sociales,
fields,
etc.,
different
etc.
social
Et différents
organizations,
utilisateurs aussi, puisque les
and
perceptions,
different
vous avez bien vu,
users,
c'est
because
beaucoup
of
basé sur
course the
les
perceptions
perceptions aussi,
are based on
sur
perceptions
l'analyse. Donc,
themselves.
voilà, donc
So they're based on
nous, on serait très
analysis.
heureux à discuter
So we'll
avec
be very happy
un certain nombre
to
de certificateurs
discuss with different
pour expliquer la
certification
méthode
organisms to
et
explain the
voir comment
method,
intégrer
and
ça
they
dans
can
dans
see
leur
how they
travail.
can integrate
Voilà,
this
mais
in
voilà,
their
si vous voulez,
offer.
on est dans notre rôle
We are
de centre de recherche
on
français. On a mis
we
sur
are
pied
playing
cette
our
méthode
role.
quand même
We
depuis
are
un combien
a
d'années qu'on développe cette
French
méthode, 4 ans.
research
Donc
center.
maintenant, on est heureux de la mettre sur la place
We
publique
have this
et on est
method.
heureux
We
surtout
are very
de
happy
pouvoir
with our
avoir
method,
dans le futur des partenaires avec
and
lesquels
we
on va
would be
pouvoir
happy to
progresser
have different
ensemble cette
partners where
méthode-là.
we can
Bien,
work together to make
l'histoire,
this
elle commence,
method
elle n'est pas
progress.
pour nous ici.
So the story is only starting
Quelle
for us. It's
relation
not
avec les certificateurs
finishing.
déjà?
Are you in contact with different
On discute,
certification
on va dire.
organisms? We are discussing. Let's say that
Non, non,
way.
mais c'est très ouvert. Hein, c'est très ouvert.
It's very open. It's very open.
J'ai une question à laquelle vous avez déjà répondu, mais les
I have a
revenus,
question. You already answered it
parler.
at the beginning,
Est-ce
so
qu'on peut adapter
maybe we
cette
can
méthode
answer
à
again.
d'autres
Could
calculs?
we adapt this method to other
Oui.
Voilà,
quantitative methods?
Est-ce que, comme par exemple la méthode du living wage,
For example, the
votre
living
méthode
wage
ne
method,
peut
or
être
your
utilisée
method,
au service basé
or
en niche,
does your method
c'est-à-dire
only
à
can
partager ses questions, et est-ce
assess
qu'à un
the
moment
access
donné,
to
la méthode
basic
prend en
services?
considération la réglementation, que ce soit nationale
Does
ou
the method
internationale?
take into account the regulation? It could be national or international regulation.
Oui.
Catherine, would you like to
Alors,
start? Yes.
Alors, on pourrait, je ne sais
So,
pas si c'est exactement la question, mais au point de
I'm
vue
not sure if that's the exact question, but concerning
on peut
quantification,
calculer, par exemple,
we
des
can
scores à
calculate
partir
different
des
scores
histogrammes réalisés par Anaïs.
starting from these different histograms that
Puisqu'on a
we
des points
saw
et
done by
qu'on a
Anais,
un certain nombre de
because we
familles,
have points and we have a certain number of families, so we could do any type of calculation.
c'est ça la question.
I'm not sure if
Pour
that's
les
the question.
contributions,
So concerning
que
contributions,
Anaïs
Anaïs showed you
pour les calculs de contribution,
different
on calcule des
calculations.
pourcentages de contribution
We are
de chaque
calculating percentages
contributeur
of
de service, qui peut être une
contribution,
les familles, l'État, les ONG, etc.
depending on who's
Donc,
contributing.
je ne
It
sais
could
pas
be a
si c'est ça la
company,
question, mais
a
en tout cas,
family, an NGO,
pour
etc.
arriver à
So
quantifier.
if we
On a
do
vu
this kind
besoin,
of
avoir
analysis,
des
yes, we can
scores
quantify
uniques
whatever we want. We
sur un
could have
ensemble de
a
médias, pourquoi pas.
unique score for a
Est-ce qu'on
bag of
travaille
services.
uniquement sur les services
Are we only
basiques?
working
Alors,
on basic
peut travailler
services?
sur des services
We
non
can
basiques.
work on
On peut
other
travailler
services,
sur des
non-basic
services
services.
qui
We
ne
could
seraient
work on
pas
services that
importants,
wouldn't
aussi
be
importants que les
that
services de base pour les
important
populations.
than the
Mais bien
basic
sûr,
services for
non, c'était pas
population.
notre
But no,
objectif.
that was not our
C'était tout
target.
créer des
Our
contrats
goal
progrès, donc
was to
qui sont
create
vraiment
progress
des éléments de base
contracts.
importants pour les
So
populations. Mais sinon,
our
évidemment,
goal
on
is to
avait
speak
des
about
choses
important
sur
elements,
Et pour ce qui est de la
basic important
réglementation
elements for the
internationale,
population. Concerning
comme
international regulation,
a fait une
as Anaïs was mentioning it, we saw the literature on the situation at the national level before going to the field. So depending on the country, is the company, is the state that's financing for schools, or can a company contribute to the funds for school? But as we were telling you, the needs of the families are very important. So we are asking them on access to healthcare, for example. And it's very difficult to find a policy that will speak about access to healthcare globally. So we're not speaking about the same level. So we're not able to do something together. And the question was, can we adapt the method to different calculations? Yes. Yes, of course. We could offer a score, but we're not calculating a wage, of course. No, we're not calculating a salary. We're calculating a score of access to services, score by group, by company, by service, etc. Are there any other questions? Yes. So this method could be used to assess the use of the development bonus. So the bonus, the development bonus of fair trade, of fair trade, it depends. If it's concerning a exact and detailed service, yes. If it concerns a wage, no, we cannot. As we were saying, if it's like the development bonus or the wage, it is important if it's improving a service that was missing. Otherwise, no. We're only able to assess it because when people use or have an increase in salary, they don't use it the same way, so we cannot know.
There are no other questions coming up. There was was there a question that we didn't answer to? No, maybe not. Okay.
Alors moi, on
So,
me signale que le DOI
somebody has told me that the DOI link is not working, so we're going to we will send the proper link to all the people who just are there, and I will send it through the email address that you actually have registered with. I will send all this link within with this presentation that we've had. So I'm so sorry about the link that is not working right now. So we will send back yes, the DOE and we will DOI, sorry, and we will send it to the people who were registered. So we if everyone agrees, if there is no other questions, if there are side questions, I will receive them and I will ask my coworker to respond. We wanted to thank you very, very much to have for your participation. This is the first time for us, so we hope that this webinar format is good for you. So you have the two documents, one in English, one in French, that was sent to you, which we'll send again, and we will have it on the Cirad website. We have also the recording of the video, which will be on our website with the link within the few days coming up of this webinar. And once again, use these methods, put us to the challenge. That's what we're here for. And we would use it. We did that in order to have something in common together, to have something we can work with for everybody. And we are absolutely available if you have any question, if you have any comments. Thank you, Anaïs. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Denis. It's been 15 years we've been working on those methodologies, so we are quite familiar with the subject matter. Thank you so much to everyone, and hopefully we'll see you in a second webinar soon enough. Thank you.